Hey y'all, this is old Jesse. Um, Today's moral is moral number 20, and it's give tithes or give charity to the Most High God. Um, this starts in Genesis chapter 14 with Abraham, and Abraham went to battle with Chedorlaomer, defeated Chedorlaomer, and then coming back, he met Melchizedek, the same Melchizedek talked about in the New Testament. And he gave tithe, or 10%, of everything that he had collected from the defeat of his enemies to Melchizedek, the king and priest of Salem. Okay. And he gave it in the name of the Most High God, Yhvh. Okay. So it was giving God the increase of what he took. Now, later on in the law, in Leviticus 27:30 to 34, it talks about giving 10% of the increase of everything that comes from the land. 10% of the animals, 10% of the fruits and vegetables and grain. And I suppose that would also include 10% of the effort of your labor, or the rewards of your labor, no matter what it is that you've done. It's not explicitly said in that passage. So that's where the concept of charity comes from, where the concept of giving to the church or giving tithe comes from. And as things go, it develops into the giving of alms or the giving of charity. Now, if we go to the New Testament, we've got a couple chapters, and let's go to Mark 12, and it's like 41 to the end of the chapter. And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how people cast money into the treasury, that's giving tithe. And many that were rich cast in much, and there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury, for all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. So that's a thing that's like, all right, well, okay, you have tithe, and then you have folks that are giving more than tithe, that are giving all their living just to be able to go to the temple. Now, there's a couple other verses that I want to read concerning this. Luke 11:41, but rather give alms of such as ye have, and behold, all things are clean unto you. Okay, so a tithe is literally 10%. Okay, under the law, it was literally 10% that they were supposed to give to the temple or to the church. Okay, and then, there was special laws for the poor and for the needy and for the stranger in their land. They were to leave in any of their fields that they grew something, they were to leave the corners for gleaning. Okay, so what my perspective on this is, like, whatever you give, it makes you as a person clean. It cleans your sins, right? All things are clean unto you, right? So think about that for a little bit. Like, the biggest thing that you can do for yourself to gain, I won't say forgiveness. Yeah, forgiveness. And to be found clean and just and upright in the sight of the Almighty is giving charity or giving alms. Okay? Matthew 5:20. For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed or be better than the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, well, that's a thing. So the scribes and Pharisees were known to give the tithe, or 10%. And it says they give it of cumin and mint and anise and all these other things. That was increase of their land, of whatever high value crops that they were growing. But you got to remember, these things that they were giving, they weren't giving the monetary value, which would not decay. They were giving an item that may wilt and decay within a short amount of time. And some of those spices didn't last very long, and some of them lasted a good long while. So, like mint, if you don't dry it properly, it goes bad pretty fast. I know that first-hand example. I've got some mint out here, and it tastes good when it's wet, but if it's not properly dried, then it goes bad fast. If it's left outside, then it just doesn't have the potency. So that's something to think about, is like our righteousness has to exceed the 10% that the scribes and Pharisees gave, right? Does that mean we have to give more than 10% of our income? I kind of feel like it does. There are circumstances where you can't, and that's where the widow and the two mites come in. It's like she was giving even though she didn't have anything. And whatever that you give cleans you at least a little bit, right? And so that's the function of charity and charitable giving. Like, even if you're begging on the street and all you get is beggar's money, and you're sitting down at a table and another beggar that's hungry asks you for that money or whatever they need, maybe some pills for the back because they've got back problems or what have you, or a drink. If you share that money, you've cleaned yourself in a way that's not possible for ordinary folks to get cleaned. If you have nothing and you share what you have, or almost nothing and you share what you have, it's by far and away more of a righteous thing than having a lot of money and donating things. Does it have the impact of a lot of money? No, not necessarily. It only has that temporary fix for that person for that day. But that's still pretty good. It got where it was supposed to go. And that's something to think about, is like the Pharisees only gave it to the temple, and then maybe the temple was corrupt, right? It's possible. We have churches that are corrupt today. We know that. So, or maybe, the scribes and Pharisees were working at the temple, and so whatever they got came back to them in their paycheck, right? I mean, think about that. That's a serious one. Like, they were working in the church. They're scribes and they're Pharisees, like they're the ones that were teaching in the church. If they give it to the church, it's going right back in their pocket, So think about that, like that's the kind of thing that is like, okay, well, our charity and our alms have to be better than that. Now, here's another passage that, to some extent, because I grew up in a very like religiously protective of what we do type social atmosphere. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, but we're just only going to highlight a little bit. Take heed that you do not your alms before men. And in verse 4, that thine alms may be in secret. Okay? So here's the thing, is Jesus doesn't want us proclaiming these alms and like making a big deal. Oh, I gave so-and-so so much money and they should be doing good and all this. He don't want that. He wants it done discreetly. At the same time, when you read passages in the New Testament about giving unto the church, these people gave to the church. They sold all that they have and gave it to the church to manage. And when alms are given to the church, when tithe is given to the church, when charity is given to the church, it is not intended to go outside the church. Okay? It's supposed to be for that church in that location. That's how it was done in the Old Testament. With exception if they know that there's a church somewhere that's doing it especially bad, then it goes to another church of the same exact belief. Okay? Any charity or any monies given to the church is intended to stay in the church and be used for the members of that church, not just the clergy. Okay? Because a lot of the elderly in the New Testament times and apostles and poor and stuff, they were not all clergy. Like the apostles were like, they're the big guys, but they moved from church to church all the time. They weren't always in the same place. It was the deacons and the elders that were pretty much in the same place all the time. So you have to think about that. It's like, okay, like this whole giving tithe, charity, alms thing is like it's a big deal. I mean, it's money, and where there's money, there's corruption. And so the only way to avoid that corruption is to say, okay, well, if we have every member in this church and they're actually literally giving 10% or more, that's a lot of money. What do we do with it? And I say that because for I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. That's assuming the scribes and Pharisees were all giving 10%, right? We don't know that. They may or may not have. But typically Jews today give 10% to the temple. Or synagogue, or whatever they want to call it. So, and that's who we're competing against. Yes, we are competing against Judaism in this thing. All right? That's how you have to look at it. You have to say, I have to be better than a Jew, and I have to be better than a scribe and a Pharisee. Okay? You're competing with the Jews to do better than them. Okay? And it's a friendly competition, right? They're only required 10%. But we're supposed to be competing against that, doing better. If we're capable, we should be giving more than that. If we're not capable, we give what we can. Okay? And oftentimes that puts you in the position of the widow and two mites. And whatever it is that you can cleans you, right? And as long as you give what you can, no matter what your financial situation is, because really that money should be going to the church and turning around and coming right back to you or to somebody in worse condition than you. Okay? That's how the church is supposed to work. If it's not working that way, then there's embezzlement and you have to get rid of whoever is that lying thief. Okay? And the ultimate example of that is Ananias and Sapphira, where they were cursed unto death for lying about their charitable giving. Okay? So don't lie about it. Just don't lie. Okay, so that is very much off the topic of where we started at with, hey, all of this is unto the Most High God, Yhvh. Even in times of war, you give tithe of the spoils to Yhvh. Okay? And that is where the charitable giving started. And the other thing that I would like to point out is the very first Gentile Christian was Cornelius. And Cornelius gave much alms. I think I read somewhere that it was twice as much. I looked through the Bible. I couldn't find it today, but I call the centurion portion 20%. Like if you're able to give 20%, you're doing pretty good. Okay? Because like that's a person that gave much alms. Okay? To the point that God noticed who he was, and he was like the first Gentile invited, him and his family, to be baptized into the faith and to gain eternity. Like, that's a big thing, man. And it's because of what he did, of his charitable giving. Okay? So that's the effect that charitable giving has on cleanness, is that, like, if you give enough, God's going to be like, oh yeah, I want you in the kingdom. Oh, you're doing good. You watch out for other people, and you make sure they're doing good, and that's the thing to do, you know? And so that's something to think about, is like, yeah, it's charitable giving, and the managing of it within a church is very important. When it comes to learning how to do charity, I know that Matthew 6 verses 1 through 4 says to keep your alms hidden, or your charity hidden. But at the same time, you know, children need to be taught how to do this thing. Okay. You know, some churches, they pass the bucket. It's not a bad practice. You know, as long as there's not like a big old bunch of pocket change going clang in the bucket all the time. You know, nowadays we do dollar bills, and maybe some of the folks around you see the dollar bills go in. If you plan on donating a lot, just use a blank envelope and just stuff all the money in there and don't say nothing about it. Nobody needs to know, right? And I know some churches had that I used to go to had collection boxes, and it would never be passed around. The collection box just sat there, and that was it. But what I have noticed is that young people, you know, in their teenage years, and maybe sometimes folks that are older, they'll pull a 5, a 10, or a 20, or whatever it is out of that bucket as it goes by. Or I've known people to sit in the back of the church and rob the whole collection box. So be careful with the amounts that you give in church. You know, if it's possible to discuss with the pastors to do or preachers to do direct deposit, or the bishops and deacons in your church, or arranging brethren, depending on the church that you go to. Not everybody has pastors and preachers, by the way. Then get it set up so that you can direct deposit, so that money doesn't get stolen, okay? But at the same time, you know, like, that money is for the operation of the church. It's for the poor. And if you put in, say, $6,000 a year, and you don't see anybody helped out in your church that's poor, then you need to ask where that money's going, okay? Because when you look at it, if you had five people giving 10% of their money, and they make $50,000 a year, well, that's $50,000. Okay? And if you don't see that money in effect at all, there's a problem, because that preacher's not using the money right. That pastor or whoever's running that church ain't using the money right, you know? And if you see your charitable giving, and all of a sudden the pastor's like, oh, we're going to go do an overseas missionary thing. That's not where that money's supposed to go. That money stays home. That money stays in that church. That's the operation of the New Testament. Unless there's an extreme need somewhere else, that money stays in that church for the poor in that church. It's for feeding the homeless. It's for clothing those without clothing. It's for providing shelter for those that have no shelter. It's providing any other needs that the church. If somebody gets in a bad car accident and don't have no insurance, and loses their car, and they need help getting back on their feet, that's what that money's for. It's not for sending to the other side of the world and and spending money on expensive plane tickets for, some folks to go over there that are spending all their vacation money to go over there too, to go out there and build a grass hut or something stupid, like that's not what it's for. $50,000, if you had a ministry and you put $50,000 toward advertisement, that's a lot of advertisement, okay? That's the kind of thing that money's for. It's for doing valuable things for the church. We're not talking about like buying valuable church seating. We're not talking about making the inside of the church enormously beautiful with all these expensive decorations. We're talking about doing something valuable for the members that need help. Okay? That's what charity is. That's what alms is. That's what giving tithe to the Most High God is. Okay? And, with that comes the passage in John. I think it's 1 John, that, taking care of the orphan and the fatherless and the widow is one of the most righteous things that you can do. That's one of the purest forms of charity that a person can do. And I'm not saying don't help other folks that are, but take care of the fatherless and the widow, and with that charity, and that charity went to a good cause, a great cause. Because you can help out an old alcoholic or somebody that hurt themselves or what have you, but an orphan, a childless father, or a fatherless child, they don't get the same things that a child with a father has, and it oftentimes, not speaking for the United States, but in other countries, mothers with children are very, very, very poor because nobody is helping them out. Okay? And widows oftentimes have no means to support themselves. In the old days, women weren't even allowed to work and make money. So that's a thing that's like, all right, well, we need to go back to keeping the church money local, until everybody's taken care of in that church. Everybody in that church needs to be taken care of before a cent leaves the door. Okay? And so that's a thing that's like, all right, well, I think that's what we need to do is to be good people, right? Be good people, give to charity, do as we should, and Yhvh Ahih will clean us and make sure that we're doing what's right. And if we don't do what's right, well then, bad things. And that's not fun to think about. So, just consider what I have to say. This is morals number 20. Give tithe unto Yhvh Ahih. Give charity. All right, old Jesse out.